Good morning, it's Mrs. Holly, and what are we learning about today? We are going to learn about how people modified their environments in the very first river valley civilizations. So what I would like you to do for your bell ringer is open up your workbook to page 28. And it says at the top, when humans adapt to or modify their environment, they change their behavior and change the world around them to meet their needs. So I've given you 4 scenarios on the left, and I want you to describe how each is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment. Okay. So, for example, domesticating animals and creating farms. So I said this is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because why? Because domesticating plants and animals is the process of adapting the plants and the animals for human use. So what I'd like you to do now is complete those other 3 scenarios on page 28. Type in your response and then press play to review. Welcome back, my friends. Okay, our next example is building bridges to connect remote villages. So, this is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because, let's see what your answer is like compared to mine. I said because bridges were built out of natural materials found in the environment, and they are building bridges to adapt to the surroundings to solve an environmental problem. So the problem is the villages are remote. They're far away from each other. And it's not easy to get from one of the villages to another. So to adapt to their environment, civilizations built bridges. That makes sense. Okay, our next one, building canals to get water to areas without direct access to water. So this is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because, I want you to check your answer. Remember, yours doesn't have to match mine exactly, but it should be about the same idea. Okay, I said it is an example of modifying or adapting to the environment because humans are diverting the water from the rivers to use it for watering crops and having water for people and animals. That makes sense too. Hey. All right, our last example. Using mud to build homes in areas with few trees. This is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because, ready to see if your answer kind of matches mine? I said, because humans were using material around them to build their homes. If you are living in a place with few trees, then it would not be practical to build homes out of wood. So people look and see what they do have a lot of. Well, they do have a lot of dirt usually, and as long as they're near water, they can turn that dirt into mud. They can also add some grass to it if there's like dry grass or brush, and then make bricks out of that mud. and build their homes out of that. So they're making use of what is available to them. Awesome. All right, let's look at some notes here. We're starting on page 29, and we're looking at the geography of the Fertile Crescent. Just a reminder here, the Fertile Crescent was called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. And here they're talking about the Tigris River, and then under here, the Euphrates River, which both empty into the Persian Gulf. Okay, here we are. Here's the Mediterranean Sea, Asia Minor, which is today Turkey. So this is the Fertile Crescent. It's also sometimes called the cradle of civilization. Why? Because this is one of the very first areas where civilizations began. So the Fertile Crescent is the land surrounding the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Remember, you're going to type these into your workbook. Well, the rivers flooded. The Tigris and the Euphrates flooded at least once a year, which left a very thick layer of silt. Silt is the mud from the very bottom of the rivers, and it happened to be very full of nutrients. So this silt was great to use for planting. Okay, some environmental challenges here. Well, the problem with the flooding, yes, it did flood at least once a year, but it was unpredictable. It did not flood at exactly the same time each year. So you have to be very careful where you put your homes and where you put your crops and when you plant your crops. Okay, because you don't want it too near the rivers, because if you do, then those floods can destroy all of your crops. And it says they even had occasional droughts. A drought is a period of time when it doesn't rain much. So water is hard to get, and that too can kill your crops. So that was one environmental challenge. Okay, another one, with few natural barriers. Sumerian villages were hard to defend. So Sumer was one of the very first civilizations in Mesopotamia. And again, there weren't a whole lot of mountains or forests to provide natural barriers. So it was relatively easy for invaders to come and try to take over. Also, building materials and other resources were scarce. So we said they're not located near woods. There's not a lot of trees there. So it would be hard for them to build homes or even defensive walls out of wood. So they had to be pretty creative in how they use the resources around them. All right, it says stop and answer the questions on page 29. So let's look at those questions. Why don't we? Okay, question number 1 asks, why do you think Mesopotamia was called the cradle of civilization? Okay, I'd like you to stop the video right now, answer the question, and then we can review it when you are done. Just hit play. Okay, my friends, welcome back. I said Mesopotamia was known as the cradle of civilization because it was the location of the very first civilizations in human history. That's pretty important. Okay, question 2. In Mesopotamia, this is referring to, what would make the land good for farming? Okay, again, I want you to stop the video, answer the question, and press play to review. Okay, welcome back, my friends. Question number 2, what would make the land good for farming? Hope you found that. I said that the river provided fertile soil, that silt, when the river floods, that's brought up to the surface, and water to feed the crops. Ooh, here, another map of the Fertile Crescent for reference. Okay, question number 3 says, what geographic challenges did the ancient Mesopotamians have? So here's Sumer, actually, by the way, right here, closer to the Euphrates River. So I want you to stop the video. You can go back and review it, type your answer, and then press play to review. All right, friends, let's take a look at this. I said a couple things. Ancient Mesopotamians had to deal with unpredictable flooding and sometimes drought, right? It didn't rain a lot sometimes. And there were few natural barriers, so building materials were scarce. Okay, hopefully you found something or wrote something quite similar to that. If not, you can always go back and change your answer. We're going to move on to page 30 in your notes. So we know what the problems were in the Fertile Crescent, so let's figure out how they solved those problems. All right, the Sumerians were one of the first civilizations to figure out how to dig irrigation ditches. So they would build these ditches that brought the water to their fields from the river without having to plant their crops right next to the river. Do you remember why we don't want to plant our crops next to the river? I hope you said flooding. Yeah, we can't put our crops right next to the river because we don't want them to get flooded. However, if we plant them further away, then we have to figure out how to get the water there. So they dug irrigation ditches. And it's good to remember irrigation ditches were discovered or built first by the Sumerians. And it says that it carried water to their crops, allowing for a surplus. If you have plenty of water, it doesn't matter if there's drought, if it doesn't rain. If you can bring water to the river, from the river to your crops, they will keep growing. So that was a good thing. Okay, we know that Sumerian civilizations in the Fertile Crescent were hard to defend. So how did they overcome this problem? They built walls around their cities using what was available to them. What was available to them? Mud. So they turned that mud into bricks and used those bricks not only to make homes, but to make the walls surrounding their cities so they would have some type of defense. Pretty smart. All right, and last we said they have few natural resources. So how would they overcome those problems? Well, they were smart and they used their crops that they grew. See, they had a surplus. They didn't need all of their crops, right? Because they had more than enough. So what they would do is they would trade their crops and also cloth and other tools with other people for their food and their raw materials. So that's how they were able to get the raw materials that they weren't able to grow or find naturally. All right, let's do a quick review on page, sorry, that should say page 30. So we're going to go to the quick review on page 30. At least this is right. All right, so question number 1. How did the ancient Sumerians overcome the inability to control the rivers? Here's a little hint. Okay, I want you to answer that question. Press play to review. Welcome back. Hopefully you wrote that the Sumerians were able to create irrigation ditches to bring the water from the river, here's the river, to their crops. And that would also help prevent flooding. Here's another picture of really the same thing. See the boat here on the river? They would dig a deep canal here. This is actually the canal, I believe. And then these trenches here brought water from the canal to the crops. These are the crops here. And usually they would make a wooden gate here to control the amount of water that was flowing from the canal into the crops so they didn't get too much. Okay, question number 2. How did the Sumerians overcome the problem of defense? We said that it was hard to defend their cities because they didn't have a lot of trees or anything to build walls. So how did they overcome that problem? I want you to stop the video, answer the question, and press play to review. All right, friends, welcome back. Well, they couldn't use trees, they couldn't use wood for walls, so we know that they used what was available to them. So they built brick walls made out of mud to surround their cities for defense. It's pretty smart of them. All right, and lastly, how did the Sumerians overcome the problem of having scarce natural resources? So if you don't have enough natural resources, how do you get them? Okay, it was just in the information you typed in your notes. So I want you to stop the video, answer the question, and come back to review. Welcome back, my friends. Oh, look at these pictures. They're so much better in color. Here's that canal. Here's another one. And here's these irrigation trenches, like right here, that go into the crops to bring water. Sorry, I'm off topic. Okay, so how did the Sumerians overcome the problem of having scarce, in other words, not enough natural resources? I said that the Sumerians were able to trade their grain, cloth, and tools for the resources that they needed. So whatever they were lacking, they used what they did produce, grain, cloth, and tools, for the resources that they needed that other people had. See these homes made of mud? Yeah. And they're using animals to farm, and they've got trees, and here's the river back here too. Quite nice. All right, now we're going to switch gears and look at a different river valley civilization. So we're going to look at ancient China in the Yellow River Valley, see what it was like. Okay, the Yellow River here is called the Huanghe River. Huanghe, it's a very long river. Here's the city, modern day city of Beijing, if that gives you an idea where that is. Okay. So the Yellow River is called yellow, by the way, because the soil at the bottom, the silt, which is called loess, has minerals in it that actually make the soil look yellow. So when that silt is not disturbed in the bottom of the river, it makes the river look kind of yellow. So it is very good for the soil. We know that the silt, this loess, gets blown by the winds from the deserts to the west and north. A problem that they had was that these floods, the Yellow River flooded just like the Tigris and Euphrates. And when they did flood, they could destroy entire villages, which is why the river was also called China's Sorrow. Another challenge in ancient China was that only 10% of the land was farmable. Okay, the majority was made up of mountainous areas, so there wasn't enough flat land on which to farm, and it's very hard to farm in the deserts as well. Right, we're going to look at the quick review on page 31. So, question 1 asks, if the Yellow River deposits nutrient-rich loess, why is the Yellow River called China's Sorrow? So if the soil is really good for crops, why is it called China's Sorrow? So I want you to stop the film, answer that question for me, please, and then press play to review. Welcome back, friends. All right, let's take a look at why the Yellow River is sometimes called China's Sorrow. We know that it does have nutrient-rich loess, that soil is really good for crops. But we also know that when the Yellow River floods, it can destroy entire villages. So it not only wipes away homes, but it kills animals and people. Okay, question number 2. What was a major geographic challenge that faced the ancient Chinese? So stop the video, go back, look in your notes on the same page, answer the question, and then press play to review. All right, friends, welcome back. Okay, so what was another major geographic challenge that faced the ancient Chinese? I said that there was a lack of farmable land. Only 10% of that land was good for farming because only 10% of it was rather flat. There were too many mountains and deserts for them to grow enough food. So now we have to figure out, how did the ancient Chinese overcome that geographic problem? Well, let's look. Here we go. So, because there was not enough flat land on which to farm, the ancient Chinese developed the very first examples of terrace farming. Look at this. So, if here is the side of the mountain, that edge here, that straight line, what they would do is they would dig into the side of the mountain and create these terraces here. And then they would do it here. And then they would do it there. And these terraces were flat. And when it rained in the mountains, water flows down, right? So the water would flow down the mountains and act as irrigation for these crops. These are most likely corn, or not corn, rice. They grow a lot of rice. And rice really does get grown in water. So see how they've created these deep terraces? So cool. And you can tell how far along the different types of rice is by looking at the color. These are all the same kind, and they're all the same at the same growth rate. So sometimes it's all the same color, you can't tell, but when they get ready for harvest, they turn different colors. And so sometimes you can see fantastic pictures of all of these brilliant colored terraces. See, they're here too. All right, let us answer the question on the bottom of the page there. It says, in your own words, describe terrace farming. So what I'd like you to do is stop the video, type your response, and then come back to me when you're done. Welcome back, my friends. So how did you describe terrace farming? I'll show you what I wrote. I said terrace farming is when you carve literal terraces, areas of flat land like the terrace. Sometimes you have terraces in your backyard so that you can use your backyard. So they carved these terraces into the sides of mountains and hills in order to create flat farmland that they could use to grow enough food to survive. Yay, awesome. All right, good job. So now what I want to do, we're going to practice with a constructed response question. So we are on page 32 in your workbook. And question number 1 asks you to describe the historical circumstances that led to or caused the activities shown in the image. Okay, so you are going to have to examine this image and tell me what is going on in that picture, what led up to it, and that's the historical circumstances. Okay, so stop the video and tell me what you can think of for this one. When you're ready to review, just press play. Welcome back, my friends. So we're going to look at historical circumstances. So I looked at this picture and I said, what do I see in this picture? I see several people, not a huge group of people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, and they're carrying, 2 of the men are carrying an animal that has been hunted. And you've got a woman on the ground and she is preparing some animal hide. So the skin from an animal. They might be using it for clothing or even for those temporary homes you see in the background. You also see a woman in the foreground and she's got a child on her lap and it looks like she's preparing food. So I said that this must be during the Paleolithic era. Okay, I said people were nomadic. They traveled in small groups following their food. When they ran out of food in an area, they moved on to find some place where food was more plentiful. So when they used up all their resources, how could I tell this was the Paleolithic period? Because I do not see any large permanent homes. I see something that looks like almost like a teepee in the back left there. And then there's a small hut over to the right behind the first gentleman there. So it looks pretty temporary to me. So I know how Paleolithic people lived, so I just explained that. And that's the situation that led to the activities that are shown in the image. Okay, let's look at document 2. All right. Question 2 says, based on this image, identify the purpose of the artist. Okay, so think about this. This is not a primary source. It's a mural, obviously. So I want you to think, what would be the purpose of the artist painting this picture? So answer that question and then press play to review. Welcome back, my friends. All right, so I looked at this picture and I said, oh my goodness, this is a much different scene than we saw in the last picture. In the last picture, we knew that was Paleolithic times because of the small temporary homes. This one I can look at and I see people building much larger permanent homes. And what's there in the foreground, in the front? Animals. So, and in the background, you can see a man with a whole herd of animals. And even way further in the background, I actually can see people in what is crops back there, fields. So I said, based on the image, the purpose of the artist might have been to show what life was like during the Neolithic period, when people farmed and domesticated animals, and people were able to set up permanent settlements. So that might be the purpose. As long as your purpose makes sense, they can't really mark you wrong, unless you talk about the Paleolithic era, because that's definitely not what's shown in the picture. We need to look at question 3. This is really the hardest one. It says, identify and explain a similarity or a difference associated with the developments shown in documents 1 and 2. You have to use evidence from both documents in your response. So I want you to stop the video. I want you to look at both documents, both pictures, and I want you to tell me one similarity or one difference. It does not say to do both. It says a similarity or a difference. Okay, so stop the video, look at the images, and type a response, please. Don't forget, you have to use text evidence. So press play when you want to review. Welcome back, friends. There are a lot of things you could have said with this document, with these two documents. I chose a difference. And in this case, I said, a difference between the developments is that document 1 shows what life was like in the Paleolithic period when people traveled in small groups as hunters and gatherers. So see, I said document 1 reveals or shows what life was like. So I actually showed that I looked at the document. I said document 2 shows what life was like during the Neolithic era when people learned how to farm, domesticate animals, and create permanent homes. I'm yawning, by the way. Didn't want to yawn in your ears. So that's my difference. Okay, so you could have written it very differently. You could have said one difference between the two documents is how people lived. In document 1, it reveals that people during the Paleolithic period lived in temporary homes. They hunted and gathered and traveled on when they ran out of resources. While in document 2, it shows Neolithic people living in permanent homes with domesticated animals and farming. Okay, so you said what the difference was, and then you go on to explain it. Okay, I kind of did it all in one shot. All right, that is our CRQ for this lesson. You guys are going to be working on your very first Enduring Issues essay coming up. It's very exciting. So it'll be a while till I talk to you again. So have a great one.